Good afternoon, everyone. It's 3:01. I see a couple people still joining in. That's all right. We're going to go ahead and start to be respectful of your time. But please note that this presentation is being recorded and it will be posted and presented with all of our other presentations on our assessment webinar series webpage, which already has every presentation that we have already recorded up through yesterday. So you can find all of that information there, and that is where this presentation will be posted as well. So good afternoon. My name is Jill Nogaris. I'm the English coordinator at the Virginia Department of Education, and I want to thank you for taking time out of this beautiful afternoon to spend an hour with us as we discuss instructional supports in preparation for the 2021 school year and the new reading SOL test that will be given in spring of 2021. So this is our grade 8 presentation. If you have joined us for any of the earlier presentations, you're going to recognize that similar format, but just looking at a different text. And hopefully, if you follow along with this one, you will have access to all of the earlier presentations and even the end of course one after tomorrow, where you can kind of look at those materials and have an idea of how to use them, even if you weren't there for the presentation. So just putting this out here, we are going to ask that if you have any questions that you use the chat feature to pose any questions to the group. On this webinar with me, I am joined by several colleagues who will be supporting and answering your questions. In the Department of Learning, I have Colleen Cassida, our middle school English specialist, and Carmen Curick, our elementary English and reading specialist. She'll be monitoring the chat as Colleen facilitates today's discussion. And in the Office of Student Assessment, I have Catherine Ringley, who will be facilitating our conversation on the assessment side, and then Lauren Zielinski, who will be answering questions in the chat. We are going to ask for you, there's like a little caret next to, like a drop-down menu in the chat. We're going to ask for you to switch it from all panelists to all attendees, because I'm pretty sure that whatever you're asking, everyone would benefit from hearing the answer to. So we might as well share best practices with everyone who's with us today. So if you could please switch that over to all attendees, that would help us all. All right, so to give you a little bit of background information, as you are all aware, in March of 2020, Governor Northam closed the schools in an emergency school closure because of the COVID-19 pandemic. And at that time, the last roughly 10 weeks of school were pretty much halted for the rest of the academic year. Some of our students who were taking high school level courses continued on with new learning, but for the most part, the learning that continued was more review and practice of skills that had already been taught in the classroom, so that we could kind of make sure that we weren't creating an even bigger gap between our students with all of the different circumstances they fell in terms of access to computers, technology, education, daycare centers, all of that. So as a result, the schools were closed down and new instruction pretty much ended. So when it came time to give the end of year SOL assessments, those were all canceled and waived by the Superintendent of Public Instruction in a response to the waiver to the U.S. Department of Education because of the emergency school closure. And as you are aware, we should have assessed the 2017 English Standards of Learning last spring, but that did not happen because of the emergency school closures. However, as of today, October 21st, 2020, we are still anticipating that all instruction is new. We're moving forward with new instruction because schools are reopened in a variety of formats, but we are in a new school year with school happening and instruction happening, and we anticipate that we will be giving the end of year SOL tests based on the 2017 English Standards of Learning. So in an effort to support school divisions as they were moving forward with this new outlook on school for this year, the Superintendent of Public Instruction and members of the Virginia Department of Education put together a guidance document that's called Recover, Redesign, Restart 2020. Basically, how are we reimagining education moving forward this year? And there's a big chunk of it that would really pertain to everything that you do in your classrooms, but we just wanted to highlight this idea of authentic learning experiences. And if there is a year to have authentic learning experiences, it is certainly this year, as we've had to be more creative than ever to figure out how we are going to bridge skill gaps, enhance critical thinking, improve creativity, and increase engagement, wondering who's behind the screen on every virtual classroom environment. But how do we motivate students and get them to log in and be interested and come to school if we're in a hybrid format? So what can we do to help make up for that learning loss and support them moving forward? So that's kind of what we're going to explore a little bit of today. In addition, to give you some background, this was created to provide you with specific examples of content and the progression of reading skills that are aligned to the 2017 English Standards of Learning to support your instructional decisions as you work with students this year in preparations for the new assessments. But just as kind of bonus material, we've included here a presentation that was done last fall. The Office of Student Assessment and the Department of Learning collaborated to interview schools across the Commonwealth in elementary, middle, and high school who had seen gain in their SOL reading scores over the last few years when, as a state, we've been trending downwards. And we interviewed those schools to find out what best practices were they using, what were they finding out worked for them, what supports did they have in place, and those best practices were all shared in the webinar that is linked here. So when you get this presentation, when it's posted to the website, you will have access to that material as well. But I want to take a minute here and discuss that part of what we're going to be looking at here are question starters to kind of enhance discussion and instruction, possibly to be used for formative assessment. And I want to clarify that the questions that are included in this presentation and the others are not meant to mimic SOL test questions. Instead, they are intended to provide you with insights into how to discuss and work with students with the 2017 English Standards of Learning. The other piece that I want to point out here today is that while we have structured this in a way that really hones in on just a couple of skills that work with the materials that we're using today, we would never advocate that you are in a situation where you take a text and you are only assessing one skill in a variety of 7 to 8 to 10 different questions. We never only look at, say, cause and effect when we are working with our students. That may be a skill that we are honing in on and supporting, but in terms of thinking about reading comprehension, we're going to bring in all of that background that students have and ask them questions that have to do with other parts of the story or the text that are in front of them. We are honing in on certain skills today to show you how you might scaffold that instruction or scaffold those questions, because we do have students in our classrooms this year that are behind, further behind than ever before. And we also have students who on their own independently kept learning after the emergency school closures and find themselves almost a grade level ahead of where they should be. So just wanted to remind you once again that this is supposed to be in perspective of how to use as a supplemental support to you implementing the 2017 English Standards of Learning. And while we have picked out small pieces of standards to demonstrate, your instructional focus should remain on the standards as a whole and how to use authentic text to support the introduction and review of skills. So how do we use that rich text to support what we want our students to know and be able to do? And I will always, always, always come back to this idea of spending time in the curriculum framework. We are a uniquely situated content area in that we are 100% skills-based, and the skills that we start learning in early elementary school, we are still working with when we graduate high school. It is what we are doing with those skills that changes. They get more complex, and we get into analyzing and synthesizing, which we are not doing in first grade, but looking at upper middle school and early high school, we are kind of moving in that direction. And the other piece that changes is the reading level of the text that we're working with and the writer's craft in that text as they get far more complex in their structures. So it's important to know and spend time in that curriculum framework, not only for the grade level in which we are instructing and teaching and working with students, but also to look at the grade level before and thinking about that lost instruction last year and where we might be able to fold that into instruction this year, because we don't have 10 weeks to spend remediating last year's material, or we will find ourselves 10 weeks behind at the end of this year. So where do we notice those skill gaps, and how do we fold that into this year's current content? And then again, for those students who are ready for that extra push and knowing that we are responsible as 8th grade teachers to move our students and have them ready for 9th grade, looking at those 9th grade skills to make sure that we are preparing our students for success in that area too. So we're going to look through a 4-step process today to kind of walk you through how you might use this material to support your students. We're going to think about this idea of authentic text and using a rich grade level passage that can be used to either introduce or review skills and provide opportunities for formative and summative review. And I want to reiterate this idea of grade level appropriate text. When we are working with students, we want to make sure that in every opportunity we are modeling with grade level text. All right, I realize that you have students sitting in your classes who do not read on grade level. And when they are working independently or in small groups, they might be working on something that's more of their instructional level. But when we as adults are modeling for students, we really need to use that grade level text so that they can start to consider it and grapple with it and learn how it works and how it's done from someone who knows what they're doing. And also to better support them, because their assessment at the end of the year, their SOL test, will have grade level appropriate passages on the assessment. So if we spend our entire year working on 8th grade level skills, but with 4th grade level text, we are not supporting our students and preparing them for that assessment. So every opportunity we have to model with grade level text is going to support our students. Then we're going to think about the content and the progression of the standards to think about, again, that missed learning, but then also that extension and how to move our students forward. And then we'll think about those question starters that could be used before, during, and after instruction, and how we can align that with what students need and what they need to understand, and for us to understand what they know, even if we are not with our students at this time. And then lastly, we'll go through some instructional resources that could extend and further support the standards that were pulled out from our reading passages, and to show you just some other supports that we have to help you as you teach this year. So at this point, I am going to turn it over to Catherine, who is going to talk to you about authentic text.
Thank you, Jill, and thank you again, everyone, for joining us this afternoon. When we talk about authentic text and selecting it for your teaching or introducing or reviewing skills, when you're selecting that text, it's important to review it first and ensure that it supports an identified purpose for reading. So when you set the purpose for teaching, you may want to look at the passage and first identify the skills that you would like to introduce or review, and then ensure that that text supports the skills that you've decided to use, or you may decide to select the passage first, and then after reviewing, determine the skills that would be best to introduce or review through reading that text. And then you're going to want to read and locate examples of the skills that support the purpose identified for that text. So when you review the passage and you find that it supports these identified purposes and it includes the examples that you want to focus on, then you'd want to use that for instruction. Of course, as Jill mentioned, you can identify those skills, but focus on reading comprehension as a whole. So if the text presents opportunities to focus on some additional skills, you want to take those opportunities as appropriate. And it's also important that your passage supports the use of guiding questions so that you can provide necessary background information to support student comprehension, engagement, and application of those skills. But if you review the passage and find that the skills are not there, you may want to select a new passage, something that's better going to support the skills and SOL that you've decided you need to cover. Or you may still go forward with using that text and instead identify some new skills that would support a new purpose for reading. So what we've done is with this presentation, we will provide an annotated grade level authentic passage. And those annotations that it will be posted along with this presentation. The annotations are going to include some discussion points and guiding questions to support the introduction and review of some skills we've identified today. This is a screenshot of what that passage will look like. And again, it will be linked when this is posted. You'll see on the right-hand side, the comment is made by Vita Program, and that's just the title of when we were making the notes. That is from VDOE and from our offices. We've created these annotations to accompany the reading selection that accompanies this presentation. So for our example for 8th grade, we have presented a paired passage. It's an article, Frederick Carter, Artist in Glass, paired with a poem called Stampede. And we're using this paired passage to give you some examples of guiding questions and things to think about or discuss with students that may model some strategies you want to take with you to your classroom. So for this paired passage, we've identified the introduction and review of symbols and figurative language, inference, summary, the application of information in other formats, and then, of course, comparing and contrasting ideas within and between texts. And when you're using paired passages, those kinds of questions are really important to think about ahead of time and get students to really think about synthesizing the information that they've read in those two passages.
Thanks, Catherine. Okay, so step 2, because we are focusing on the progression of the new 2017 standards, we wanted to look at how to best meet the needs of our students by examining those skills we need to teach in order for them to be able to demonstrate that standard. Often we talk about in divisions and at the building level of unpacking the standards, but today we want it to be more of an examination of how the skills and the framework support the standards and how they begin to connect with other skills for a more in-depth learning experience that connects to the learning from grades before us and then will continue on in high school. So like Catherine said, we are going to use the examples of the standards that are found in our model authentic text. And we will start here with 8.5D, where students are expected to explain the use of symbols and figurative language. This is what the top section and the blueprint say our students need to be able to do as 8th graders. But how are we going to get them to do that? And that's where the essential knowledge, skills, and processes section of the framework comes into play. A couple of key considerations when using the framework to really capture the progression and development of the skill you're focusing on in the text. Be sure, as Jill had mentioned as well, to review the grade level before and the grade level after in order to allow access for all students. That is really key to noticing the difference between the standards at each grade level. So for example, we see what our students have to do in 8th grade here, and the skills that they need to work on to reach that standard include analyzing poetic devices in prose and in poetry. And in addition to figurative language and symbolism, they should be analyzing word choice and imagery, and rhyme, rhythm, repetition, and sound elements as well. And that's all included in that essential knowledge and skills section of the framework. So it's our responsibility as 8th grade teachers to incorporate those opportunities for working through those analyzing skills using these devices. And that can seem like a lot for some students to process, especially when we think about where we are in terms of recovery. So we can look back at the skills from 7th grade under this standard, 7.5G, to see that students should be able to practice describing the impact of these components in an author style. And based off the 7th grade essential skills, they need to be able to recognize and analyze authors' use of foreshadowing and irony, as well as these other devices. So this might be where some of your students still need support in that spiraling back to practice with those 7th grade skills that are broken down a little bit more before looking at them all together as indicated in the expectation for 8th grade. And they can do that by working with the scaffold questions, which Catherine's going to show you some examples of in step 3, but to help build that base and always allowing for progression into the 8th grade skill, because, you know, as we know, we're responsible for making sure that our students leave us with the best understanding of our grade level skills as possible. But also for our students who already demonstrate that understanding of the target skills for 8th grade, you can look at the next grade level progression to see where they will need to go in terms of literary devices for this example. So you see there in 9.3E, the addition of literary and classical allusions to their explanation is in that standard. And so if you look in the essential knowledge and skills for 9th grade, students need to be able to use that prior reading knowledge and other sources to identify the meaning of literary and classical allusions, as well as analyze figurative language. So we see that in 8th grade, the skills that we're synthesizing a lot of the grade skills before us, so that as the text becomes more complicated, they will depend upon the practices that we have put in place. And so the opportunities where we can provide students with questions to get them thinking about how to use their prior reading knowledge and recognize something like an allusion, we are setting students up for success in the following grade with that next level of skills. And so in this progression here, we see that 8th graders have to, they are expected to make inferences and draw conclusions based on explicit and implied information to the text for support. Well, the foundation for that top standard was actually built in the essential knowledge and skills under 7th grade, where the framework says that we need to practice using evidence from the text for supporting our drawing conclusions or making inferences. And that essential skill is part now of the blueprint and standard for 8th grade. But in 8th grade, when we teach this standard, the skill set also includes making predictions through inference and drawing conclusions and using evidence from the text for support. So we need to be intentional about having students think about what inferences they're making and what logical conclusions they're making, and what implied or explicit information from the text could support their predictions. Because again, in setting them up for what's to come, in 9th grade, this skill becomes a part of the process in most every skill they need to be able to do, because analysis becomes the goal for reaching several of the standards moving up into high school. And support from the text is needed to complete that analysis. So again, the skills begin to fold into new standards as we go throughout the progression and it gets more complex. So without the base from the grade before, students will struggle as each new level of rigor is introduced. So that's something to really consider when we look at the progression and the continuum. And you know, again, the blueprint provides us with that top level of a standard. However, in order to reach that top level, we have to use the curriculum framework to see what those standards mean by skill set. For instance, like here for grade 7 and 8, there is a standard that says summarize text identifying supporting details. So going by the blueprint, we know we need to cover this standard at each grade level. But the 7th grade skills for that standard require students to practice with determining the central ideas in a text and analyzing the development over the course of the text and provide an objective summary of the texts. But that standard in 8th grade means that students have to work through the process of reading several texts on a similar topic and then being able to synthesize what is read and use strategies for summarizing. So you see these skills then get looped, as you see, into the 9th grade standard, where synthesizing and summarizing is now a part of the actual standard. And that progression and spiral is very purposeful and intended to get students building upon prior knowledge and skills, which is where we come in at the middle school level, particularly those setting up in 8th grade. Now, in these set of SOLs, you can see from the standard that we go from organizing and synthesizing information in 7th grade to evaluating, organizing, and synthesizing in 8.6K. And then we see that analysis there added in 9th grade, right? But to see what we need skill-wise to get students progressing from just organizing and synthesizing to also evaluating, look in the essential knowledge and skills to check that you're going back to that process of reading texts on similar topics and synthesizing what's read, recognizing those organizational patterns, analyzing multiple counts of the same topic, and again, analyzing texts with conflicting information and identifying how the texts disagree. So through practice with these skills, you're teaching students how to evaluate information while also spiraling in organizing and synthesizing, as well as preparing them for that 9th grade step of analysis. These skills are there to set the students to that top level of the standard. Again, this is a clear example of how the blueprint shows that analyzing ideas within and between selections, providing textual evidence, is a standard for 7th, 8th, and 9th grade. But we are again using those skills indicated in the framework to differentiate that standard by grade level, using skills we also use for building mastery of other standards on grade level and future grade levels. So for instance, analyzing multiple accounts of the same event or topic, noting important similarities and differences in the point of view they represent, and then analyzing more than one text with conflicting information on the same topic. Those skills that we talked about, they also help support development of the previous standards we were talking about with synthesizing, organizing, and evaluating for use in written and other formats. But we want to have students practicing with that process of synthesizing and evaluating while also analyzing ideas within and between texts, using evidence to support their analysis. So that's why best practice promotes starting with a themed unit to incorporate a variety of texts that includes fiction, nonfiction, poetry, drama, a variety, so that students are constantly working toward that evaluating, synthesizing, organizing information, using text to support their ideas.
So Colleen took us through the progression of skills that are going to be covered with that annotated paired passage. And now we'd like to present to you some sample question starters. Again, these are not meant to mimic SOL test questions, but they are meant to show kind of a progression of questions that may end up at the end, at the end of this list of questions with some that could incorporate writing, because as you know, we want to try to incorporate student writing when possible to really get them to think about what they know and produce something that you can read and then get a good handle on their knowledge as well. So some example question starters for SOL 8.5D. This is our figurative language SOL, you'll see in the beginning, identify examples of figurative language and then the title of the text. And that's going to be a pretty low-level question, but it is important to do some formative assessments, especially in the beginning when you are introducing or reviewing that skill for the first time, and see where your students are. And then you can progress through the questions. Why did the author include figurative language? In this text, the author uses this type of figurative language to help the reader. And then also in the text, the purpose of the figurative language is to what? And again, as Jill mentioned in the beginning of this presentation, the intention is not that you would ask all of these questions in a row. It's just giving you some samples, some ideas, and you may have classes or sets of students who would respond better to certain questions or who are ready for a different level of question than others. So again, this is just to give you a variety. To continue with this, for symbolism, excuse me, what idea does, and then the symbol symbolize, what does the title symbolize, and then as a writing prompt, explain how figurative language found in the text supports the development of a statement. Use specific details from the text to support your answer. Some sample question starters. What is an inference? Again, that's a pretty low-level question, but we do want to know that students understand that content-specific vocabulary. If they are taking an assessment and they're asked to infer something and they're not sure what infer means, that could cause some problems. So it might be a good idea to ask if students know what an inference is in the first place. Some other examples, asking students what the reader can conclude, or which sentence from a story supports a conclusion. Here's an accept item. Each of these details support the idea that, and then perhaps a conclusion, except, which inference may be drawn from the passage. And then again, as an example for writing, after reading the passage, what inference can be made about, and then something from the text that you've previously identified. Use specific details from the text to support your answer. Again, encouraging students to continuously go back to the text and use specific details that they found there, rather than not using support or drawing too much from their own background information or opinions. For 8.6i, some samples, which paragraph discusses, and then a detail from the text. And again, pretty low level. They can kind of scan the information and find which paragraph. And then as we go through, which question is not answered in the text, which of these is the best summary, which detail is most important to include in a summary. So we need students to be able to discriminate among details. And it would be important to include details that are true from the text, something that really was read. It's just not important enough to include in a summary, just to ensure that they can discriminate among those details and really understand what's important to include in a summary. Continuing, which details should be added to the passage to support this idea. And finally, write a summary of the text. Use only details most relevant to a summary. For 8.6K, the SOL that is about information in other formats. Information from this text could best be used as a part of, and then a presentation about, and then another topic that's related to what they've read about. But again, you want to preview that text and identify where that information could be included in a different presentation. Which paragraph would be most helpful for a presentation about something else? This information would be most useful to someone who, and based on this information, which alternate written or visual format could be used to support this idea? Use specific details from the text to support your answer. As we move on to our SOL that asks students to compare and contrast a paired passage, you could say paragraph 2 from the article and stanza 1 from the poem are similar because based on the reading passages, which statement about this idea is true? How is this information presented differently in the two passages? And they are alike because. Kind of increasing in difficulty with our questions. The passages are different because which sentence expresses an idea shared by both authors, and explain how this idea is similar or different from this idea from the second text. Use specific details from the texts to support your answer. And again, just to reiterate, the intention is not that you would use all of these questions in a row or all of these questions as they appear on the slide. We wanted to give you some starters, but the intention is that you would be able to adapt these to your students, your texts, your intention behind the lesson, and pull what's appropriate and leave what is not.
Okay, and so step 4 is about exploring instructional resources that are going to support your work on the skills and standards you're focusing on. So once you have found texts that you like and that you've checked with your division to be sure that those texts align with policy and that they align to the goal of your lesson, we encourage you to look through our abundance of, these are our comprehensive instructional plans, and they are on our website, and the link is here on this page of the presentation, which you will get after today. And we're going to walk you through the page layout and highlight some lessons that might be useful to teaching the standards we talked about today. This is the snapshot of our main page here, and these lessons were developed by Virginia teachers, and they're here for your use. So again, whether you'd like to use a different text but keep the lesson, or you need some inspiration for additional and supplemental resources, you can use these lessons for whatever you need them to be. The lessons are categorized by strand and then by grade band. So I want to point out that while some lessons are listed for a particular set of grades, that doesn't mean that they can't be modified or adapted to fit the needs of a different grade level or a set of students. So there are plenty of lessons that might not fall under the grade that you teach, but if you explore through them, through the skills that they cover, you might be able to find something that will work for your students or a particular group of your students. So that's why they're labeled, referencing the actual standards or skills that they're covering. And then once you click on a lesson, the format will look like this. So you see that the primary or focus strand is listed first, but because these lessons reflect best practice of integrating all the strands, the integrated strands are listed below the primary. So you'll then see under that the essential understanding along with the essential skills and knowledge. And these sections will help guide you in figuring out what students will need to know in order to complete the learning in the lesson, as well as the skills that students will need to demonstrate in order to show success with the strand and standard through the activities in that lesson. Next, you'll notice that the primary SOL is listed because this is really the targeted standard for that lesson. However, the reinforced related standards are also listed so that you can see where there are opportunities in the lesson for reading and writing together and other standards by grade level that will support and connect that understanding. So that's what it's going to look like when you first get onto the actual lesson, and then there will be the procedures for how to follow through and resources after that. So we are going to guide you through a few lessons that would support the standards we're looking at today, like we said. And this lesson is word choice in paired text. And you see the focus there is SOL 8.5D. And again, this could fit in with a unit that you're already working on, or it could be used as a separate support for students who might need additional support or might need a little extra push or challenge, or who even are on grade level. So you will see our guided notes here that reinforce that idea that if you are reading through the text within this lesson and you see that it supports opportunity for spiraling of additional skills, by all means include those opportunities, because that's what's going to really get our students to improve and grow in their reading comprehension and applying the skills. So this lesson particularly can be found under the reading strand in the fiction section in the grade band 6 through 8. And the structure of this lesson guides students through 2 texts with embedded questions to promote thinking and discussion, which could be modified to fit a virtual or blended environment, whatever you find yourself in once you get to teaching this strand and this standard. So the writing component also provides students to use opportunity for students to use word choice carefully to craft like a letter to a character from one of the texts. And then extension activities include additional question stems that support that higher level thinking. So there's also opportunity for students to start with like a highlighting activity, looking at specific words to make sure that we've really got that foundation of how words are being used. So it really does run that spiral in terms of whatever you might want to use it for. And then in this lesson, making inferences and drawing conclusions, the lesson uses direct and indirect characterization to get at making inferences and drawing conclusions. And it provides several forms of texts. And there are also some really helpful graphic organizers and other resources that support varied levels of thinking. But it's also flexible enough to meet needs of that would be in different environments. Again, like if you wanted to use some of the discussion questions that are intended for a paired reading with partners, there are other ways that you could use that using Google Docs or some other platform that might allow still for that collaboration among students. So definitely look through that to see if there's anything that you might be able to use. And then our next one is it uses the GIST method for summarization. And that is a strategy, according to the lesson, that teaches students to use prediction to aid that comprehension of text. And then it argues that the ability to predict what a passage will be about is often based on prior knowledge. So when we connect new information to previous background knowledge, students' comprehension of text is improved, and then getting at that ability to summarize. So there are links to using this strategy built in and throughout that lesson. And this is a nonfiction lesson. So it's under the reading strand in the nonfiction section for the grade band 6 through 8. And then the compare and contrast lesson, this is actually going to be in the fiction section of our reading category in the grade band 6 through 8, because part of the paired texts that are in that lesson are poems and little fictional pieces, and texts can be mixed and matched with each other to analyze and work through. So this is a great resource if you're looking for texts that can be worked together and varied by level and given to a variety of different students. Also, this lesson is rich, and a lot of our lessons do this, but this particular lesson is rich with texts that promote that integration of history and social science content. So that could be really helpful in thinking about where we are in terms of trying to build in those skills of English and history during, these different learning environments that we find ourselves in. So we really encourage you to use the lessons to provide extensions or scaffolds for the skills that you're working on, and to help reinforce that ELA skill building and laying the groundwork for students to be successful with grade level expectations and beyond. And at this point, I'm going to turn it back over to Jill so she can share with you some resources on our site, where to locate them, and then to follow up with any resources that you might need after this webinar.
Thank you, Colleen. Thank you, Catherine. Yes, it is my pleasure to kind of wrap things up for you and show you where you can find pieces, especially as this is a collaborative effort between two offices that maintain separate web pages on the same website. We thought it might be imperative to kind of put those pieces together and help you find them. We know that we have a very high level website, and sometimes it can be a little bit cumbersome to find the pieces that you're looking for. So we've kind of put them all together here in this resources list for you. The top link will just take you to the English page, where you can find kind of like a landing page that will take you to all things English K-12. And then we have listed here for you the blueprints. And if there's one big takeaway that I hope you got today, it was that just looking at the standard in the blueprint is not enough to show you instructionally what we need to do to support students to be tested on that standard. You really need to go into the essential skills and knowledge and processes that are found, those essential understandings that are found in the curriculum framework, to really support you in instructing your students with those standards. You know, some of them, again, are very just top line and don't give enough detail for what that means a student was asked about. So you can get more detailed information from that curriculum framework. We also have the reading progression charts posted here. Last time for the 2010 standards, these were blue. So if you are working off of any blue copies, please throw those away. We are now explicitly, solely 100% teaching the 2017 standards of learning, and each of those progression charts is orange. So we have one for communication, reading, writing, grammar, and research. And this will just give you another visual to kind of figure out where students are introduced to skills and where they're kind of progressing and showing more of a mastery level, basically in every skill that we have K-12. And then we have posted the curriculum framework that we keep encouraging you to go back into, and the new standards of learning. So both those links are there. And then, as 8th grade is one of our computer adaptive SOL tests, we do have some information here to kind of answer some of your questions about computer adaptive tests. So there is a landing page, a home page about that. We have a document here that compares the passage-based CAT to a traditional test. And if you've been in the classroom for a while, you remember our pre-CAT days when we had a traditional test. And so this will kind of walk you through the differences to help you understand how that works now. We also have a link to the webinar series that you are participating in today. I encourage you to go and look at the other materials that are there. I would check out on October 1st, we gave a global overview, a K-12 overview of how the series would run and the information that would be available in each grade level. So while we only picked out a few skills to identify and work with today and to give you question starters for, you may find that there are cause and effect questions in another grade level presentation. So while again, the stems were kind of written to show a progression of skills within a grade band, you can still get some support information from looking in the other grade level presentations to get additional question starters. And in that overview presentation is where we list the standards that are addressed in each of the grade level presentations. And again, they were selected based on what was rich in the text and what we could really use. So some of them are repeated and some of them are only found once, because it was based on the text and not a false sense of hey, it's September, I need to work on fact and opinion, so everything I do this month is fact and opinion, because then we are in a situation where we are giving forced examples that are not strong and don't lend themselves to really good instruction. What we want to do is pick a rich piece of text and teach our students how to break it down and use it and all of the skills they have to fully comprehend and understand what's in front of them. And then that recover, redesign, and restart document is here for your use if you're interested. We have an FAQ about passage-based CAT testing and how that works within that grade level reading. We also have some SOL practice items in TestNav 8. As you're aware, TestNav 8 is the program that the students use to actually take their SOL test. So we do have some practice items that have been aligned to the 2017 standards that allow students to see what questions aligned to the 2017 standards look like, but also provide a really comprehensive understanding of what TEIs look, what the functionality of those TEIs are, how to use the tools that are available to students, and really kind of take the fear out of that test anxiety because of the complicated nature of taking a test online. So if they can practice with the tools and learn and get comfortable with the environment, then they really only have to work on their reading comprehension. So it provides an opportunity for students to get comfortable with the program so that they can use all of the tools and all of the tools in their head and on the computer to support their test taking. And as we've been under the 2017 standards for 3 years now, we actually do have 2 years worth of presentations from our deeper learning conferences and SOL institutes where teachers from around the Commonwealth presented on how to instruct different concepts using the 2017 standards. So I encourage you to check those out if you haven't. I would also encourage you to check out the full page of English instructional plans that are posted there. And when you're on our English landing page, you will also see a link to all of our comprehensive literacy webinar series where you can get down and look at, I want to say there's maybe 17 or 18 webinars posted now that really get into specifics, even middle school reading. There's one on performance assessments, writing in the content areas, how to do interdisciplinary reading with your history counterpart. So there's some material there that you might find of use. And then lastly here we have Superintendent's Memo 249-20, which came out this fall, that explicitly states that the SOL tests that are given in spring of 2021 for all 3rd through 8th and end of course reading will be based on the 2017 standards of learning. So that is a complete switch from 2010. We are no longer just in a field test situation with the new standards. The test will 100% be on the 2017 standards of learning. So that's just some documentation to support you so that you can remember beyond, I know I heard it somewhere. The information is included in that memo. And then of course, this is our contact information. We are here to support you. We want to support you. So if you ever have any questions moving forward, please reach out to anyone in either of our 2 offices and we will find you the answer you're looking for, put you in the direction of someone who can help you if we can't, and we will do whatever we can to make sure that you have a great 2020-2021 school year and that your students do as well. So that concludes our time together this afternoon. Just a reminder, if you're interested, we will be doing this one more time tomorrow afternoon at 3 o'clock where we look at end of course, which is 9th, 10th, and 11th together. So if you're interested, check that out. As I stated at the beginning, the 7th grade presentation from yesterday is already posted on our website. So if you're interested in kind of looking at that spiral or any of the question starters there, you can find that material posted as well. But thank you so much, and I hope you all have a wonderful afternoon. Thank you.